You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another anime review. Today I'll be reviewing the Violent Jack OVA Trilogy, which it may surprise you that I have not reviewed already. It certainly surprises me. See, I've watched the Violent Jack OVA Trilogy probably a total of 4 times, and I have talked about it multiple times on the channel before. But for whatever reason, I haven't gotten around to reviewing it until now. But if you've been following me for a while, then you know that Violent Jack, specifically the OVA Trilogy I'm going to be talking about today, is what got me into Go Nagai. I started with the OVA Trilogy, proceeded to the manga, and then started watching the 70s Devilman, and that's how I got into Go Nagai in the beginning. This OVA Trilogy, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I discovered through someone doing a top 10 list. I'm not exactly sure who it was, but the original video no longer exists, because I can't find it anywhere, but it was someone doing their top 10 most fucked up animes. Violent Jack was at number 1. So immediately after watching that video, I went and watched through the OVA Trilogy, which, believe it or not, was uploaded to YouTube at the time, and last I checked, still is. Uncut, too. But that's neither here nor there. I do actually own the DVD, which is how I've rewatched it multiple times, but the first time I saw it was on YouTube. And the first few times I watched it subbed. However, when I rewatched it, which was last night at the time I'm recording this, I watched it dubbed for the first time. Now, I had seen clips of the dub before, specifically the Violent Jack makes an entrance clip, which is probably the only one that really gets any recognition because of how stupid and cheesy it is. But other than that, watching the dub, I discovered there are lots of stupid, cheesy lines that I love.
God damn it! Where the hell is Jack? Fucking chicken shit! Fucking shit! Fucking shit! Holy shit, the bastard's here!
Jesus, did you see that? Who is that guy? He just shrugged those bites off like they were nothing.
House. Fucking Godzilla, if you ask me.
No, it isn't.
Violence Jack. That's what they call him.
We meet again, Captain Buttwipe. Fuck you!
And it's definitely in the same league as the Devilman OVA dub. It's definitely worth watching if you enjoy manga entertainment's cheesy, stupid, over-the-top, extra profanity-laden dubs they do. My particular favorite line was in episode 2, where Jack was talking to Mad Saurus, and he's like, "Ah, so we meet again, Captain Buttwipe." That one was really good. There was also a line in episode 3 where one of the Hell's Wind says, "It's fucking Godzilla, if you ask me," and then someone else says, "No, it's not, it's Violent Jack," which, a lot of these lines are really dumb, and that's why they're great. I love this dub. I will say, however, unlike the Devilman dub, which, although I love, I feel does ruin the atmosphere of the OVAs, so that's why I always recommend first-timers watch it subbed. Although, like I said, I do also love that dub as well, for the same reasons that I love this one. I don't feel that this dub necessarily ruined the atmosphere like the Devilman one did, because Violent Jack, specifically this OVA trilogy, is very much like an action movie. It doesn't have to have, like, a deep horror atmosphere, like I feel that the Devilman OVAs build up in parts of them. I mean, granted, they're both action series, too. And a lot of people classify Violent Jack as horror. I don't really. Some quote-unquote horrific things happen, but it's not really a horror series, in my opinion, whereas Devilman, I'd say, is more of a horror series, although I'd also say that it is action and tragedy, although the Devilman OVAs aren't really tragedy because they don't tell the whole story, but Devilman as a whole is a tragedy. Anyway, Violent Jack, for those who are unfamiliar, is the story of this big, beefy, buff beefcake guy named Violent Jack, who carries around a gigantic jackknife, which is basically a glorified pocket knife is what a jackknife is. But his is like the size of a fucking machete. I have looked all over to try and get an actual knife like this, and I don't think they exist. I would love to own one just because it's cool, but nevertheless, I do not think one actually exists. Violent Jack himself has the strength of a gorilla, the fangs of a wolf, and eyes burning with the fires of hell. That's kind of how the manga goes, and the original Japanese says something similar to that effect. I can't remember the exact words in the OVA in the Japanese, but in the dub they say he has the strength of 50 men, which I think is reasonable for Violent Jack. He's a pretty tough guy. He also clearly has regenerative abilities, because there are points where he gets so fucking wounded, and then he's fine later on. But he's kind of an enigma. He's this mysterious figure that kind of wanders the wasteland, and no one knows exactly who or what he is, but his main thing is he defends the innocent. He's kind of like Kenshiro, like I said before in a previous video, although he did exist before Kenshiro did in the manga. Now, these OVAs don't do the manga justice at all. There's only 3 episodes, episode 1 having nothing to do with the actual manga, and that episode is called Harem Bomber. It's also known as Harlem Bomber in some translations, and it's also known as Slum King in its original US release, because when they came out here in the US in the 90s, they were released out of order, and they changed the titles. In the US, the order that they released the episodes is 2, 3, 1. It's not really something that necessarily matters, because Violence Jack's arcs are very episodic, even in the manga itself. You could read them in almost any order. There's a few exceptions, but for the most part, they could happen in any order. And although I'm not exactly sure where on the timeline all the arcs fall, because that's just kind of how Violence Jack works in both the manga and in the anime, I do think that Evil Town is kind of the beginning of the arcs. Mainly just because the fact that Jack was buried underground and digs his way out. There's some things in the manga that make me think that might not be the case, but even then, it's very hard to tell. But regardless, if you were to think of it as watching it in chronological order, I suppose you could think of 2, 3, 1 as a valid way to look at it, as far as episode numbers. You know, those arcs don't happen in that order in the manga. Harem Bomber doesn't happen at all in the manga. And Hell's Wind happens way before Evil Town, so even if you watch the episodes in technical order, you're not actually being accurate to the manga. Each time I've watched this series, I've liked it more, believe it or not. The first time, I still did like the first episode, but I felt it kind of dragged and was slow, even though it's the shortest of the 3. The subsequent viewings I've watched it, though, I've liked the first episode more and more, to the point where I absolutely love it. I mean, I always did, but I definitely think it gets kind of underrated, because a lot of people don't like the first episode so much. And obviously, since it is anime only and doesn't adapt any of the manga, it's not as good as the other 2 episodes to an extent, but I still think that it's one that's worth watching. And I like it a lot. And I love the soundtrack to it. It's got a very 80s feel to it, which is part of why I love it. And the cheesy dub, just kind of adds to that effect. I would still recommend watching it subbed as well, which is probably still my preferred way to watch it, but I do like the cheesy dub it has. But episode 1 follows Jack as he goes up against the Harem Bomber, who is the Slum King's right-hand man, the Slum King being the main villain of Violence Jack for the majority of the manga. And it has Jack go against him and free these sex slaves that the Harem Bomber had kept captive in his area. Episode 2 adapts the Evil Town arc from the manga, which, as I said, I always used to think was a prequel. However, then I read the actual arc in the manga, and some of it leads me to believe it might not be. But it could still fit in as one if you think about it in terms of this OVA. Primarily because nobody knows who Violence Jack is in Evil Town, whereas everyone knows who he is in the other 2 episodes. One could argue that's because all these people have been trapped underground, but it's like, then how did Jack get trapped underground? The only way this really makes sense is that this arc happened not long after the Hellquake and was Jack's first emergence into the new world. And for those of you who don't know what the Hellquake is, that's like the major plot point of Violence Jack. The Kanto region of Japan was destroyed by this giant earthquake called the Kanto Hellquake. Through Evil Town, Jack is trapped in an underground mall with 3 different groups of people. The people in Group A seem like normal people. They're just a bunch of, like, old police officers, mayors, just normal-seeming guys, right? But then the second group is this group of, like, thugs and degenerates that are just psychotic, known as Mad Saurus's gang, including Mad Saurus himself, his hermaphrodite girlfriend Blue, and a bunch of little thugs. Other than that, there's the third group, from Group C, which is just a bunch of supermodels. Throughout the episode, you find out that Group A isn't what they turned out to be. So basically, it's just a group of seemingly normal people that are actually rapists, a bunch of thugs who make no secret that they're rapists, and a bunch of supermodels trapped in an underground mall together. So as you can imagine, chaos ensues. And Jack is there to get in on the violence there. Episode 3 is the Hell's Wind arc. It's an adaptation of the Hell's Wind arc of the manga, about a biker gang that goes on and terrorizes people. It also follows a lady named June who saw her boyfriend get brutally murdered before she was brutally raped. And she goes back to get revenge on the Hell's Wind. In my opinion, June's actually kind of an underrated Violence Jack character because she's really cool. She's not able to defeat anyone on her own, which I think is more realistic, but she never gives up, and she has a will and determination to fight back that makes her a very admirable character. Now, as for the content of Violence Jack itself, a lot of people will tell you, oh, this is one of the most fucked up animes ever made. And it is pretty fucked up. There's definitely more fucked up stuff out there, but it is one that I wouldn't recommend for the faint of heart. Violence Jack has a lot of gore, a lot of nudity, and a lot of, sexual violence, especially in the second episode. In the second episode, there are a ton of rape scenes that go really over the top. There is blurring and pixelation in the scenes, but that could also be said about most hentais. There are points in this anime where it basically could be a hentai. And in some ways, I don't know how it's not classified as one, because I think it's personally maybe a little bit more graphic than, say, Mystery of the Necronomicon, although that one is unblurred. But it's not classified as a hentai, and again, it's only a few scenes that come close. It's also very brutal. None of these scenes are anything I would consider erotic. They're very much there for shock value. But I do think, despite how graphic Episode 2 is, I think Episode 3 actually handles those scenes better because they're more left into your head. They don't show as much detail, but they're more shocking because of the way they're portrayed with the character reactions and what happens and how they chose to edit it together. I actually find those scenes much more shocking in Episode 3, even though they're less graphic. There are some of those scenes in Episode 1 as well, but Episode 1 is by far the tamest of the three. After watching the dubbed version last night, I decided to look online to try and find the voice cast to see if it was anyone I recognized. Not really so much was there anyone I really recognized. A lot of them did other dubs from the 80s and 90s, but I did come across some very interesting information on Violence Jack on IMDb. Primarily the way that audiences view it. Believe it or not, women tend to like Violence Jack more than men do, which I found absolutely insane given the content given in it. But it just goes to show you can't make judgments like that. And I actually found it kind of cool to realize that chicks seem to dig Violence Jack. When you look at the series rating as a whole overall, the people who rate it the highest are, on average, women in the age range of 18 to 29. The average rating on there is a 9.3, which is by far the highest rating it has on the site. And as a whole, women give it an 8.1 on the series as a whole. When you look at the individual episodes ratings, it's a little bit different. With the individual episodes, on all three counts, the people who rate it the highest are women aged 30 to 44. The highest rating that the first episode, Harem Bomber, also known as Harlem Bomber or Slum King, women aged 30 to 44 gave it a 7.4, and women on average gave it a 6.4. Again, the highest rating it has on the site. For instance, males typically gave it a 5.2 on average, and the highest ranking that men gave it are tied between the 30 to 44 and 45 plus range, which is 5.3 on both counts. Also, since I forgot to mention it on the previous thing I just mentioned, for the whole series, men only gave it a 6.6 as a whole, with the highest ranking men gave it as a 6.7 in the 18 to 29 age range. For Evil Town, the highest rating it has is 7.6, again by women aged 30 to 44, and the second highest rating being women aged 45 plus at 6.0, so both of them come to older women. And as an average, women give it a 6.5, whereas men only give it a 5.4, with the highest rating being a 5.5 in the 18 to 29 age range. Then we move on to Hell's Wind. And in Hell's Wind, the highest rating it has, again by women aged 30 to 44, is an 8.0. They seem to really like that one. And I don't blame them. That was my favorite for a while. In fact, it's still definitely... It's actually hard for me to pick now, so it may still very well be. But I think Evil Town has a lot of elements in it I really like too. As a whole, women give it a 6.1. The second highest rating it has is a 5.7 by women aged 18 to 29. However, to be fair, the lowest rating this episode has is also by women as a 2.0. But that is only based on one review in the 45 plus age range. Men, as average, give this a 5.1. The highest rating men gave this episode was a 5.6 in the 18 to 29 age range. Now, to be perfectly fair, although on average women did give it a higher rating, a lot less women actually rated it than men, so that's one way to look at it as well. But I still think it's interesting that overall, no matter which part of it we're looking at, the individual episodes or the series as a whole, women rated it higher than men. I just found that interesting. It doesn't really affect anything, I just thought it was an interesting tidbit to bring up. I definitely think people overreact to this series a lot when they try and say that it's one of the worst things they've ever seen because of how graphic it is, because like I said, there's worse out there as far as graphic content. And it makes me kind of angry with how that the only thing this series gets attention for is its graphic content, because I really love this series. It's a fantastic 80s anime that has plenty of violence and plenty of other graphic content, sure. But I really like the story behind it and the action, and it has decent adaptations of the manga arcs. Like I said, it doesn't do the manga justice by any semblance of the word, but it's still something I highly recommend watching if you're a Go Nagai fan. Violence Jack is by far my second favorite Go Nagai series after Devilman. I think it's one of his most underrated series. There was a comment I read once on one of the original uploads of the episodes, which I think at this point has been taken down, but like I said, people keep re-uploading the series to YouTube. Back when I first watched it on YouTube, before I bought the DVD, there was a rating someone gave it where they said, Violence Jack is like if Fist of the North Star was directed by Lloyd Kaufman. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. Yes, it's over-the-top violent, and if you watch it with the dub, it's cheesy as hell. But overall, it's very similar to Fist of the North Star, and although I do think Fist of the North Star overall is probably a superior series, Violence Jack is another good series in the same vein. It's a shame it only got 3 OVA episodes and didn't get a full anime series, but it's still something I highly recommend watching. Anyway, this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great day.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!